and we want to try to help as best we can. With that said, sometimes schools are not always best positioned to be the sole or only or a source of, for lack of a better term, donations for that reason. Some of the requests that we get include, for example, whether or not our students could begin making 3D printer masks. And so we do have a few 3D printers in our schools. So I reached out to our science coordinator and Principal Gill, where several of these machines are located. And we asked for our science department's input on this. So in terms of the time alone required to make a mask, even with a template, it's over 2+ hours. And then the finicky nature of the quality of the machines that we have, coupled with the fact that they're not even FDA approved, while we think this would be a great learning experience for students, we are not in a position, nor would we recommend that we donate our limited supply of 3D printers for this purpose. What we have done is the science department is encouraging students through an initiative with STEM Hub that if they have their own 3D printer equipment and are looking for a real-life application and potential science-based activity that's relevant and engaging, that they could in fact participate in the creation of these masks and shields with 3D printers. But again, these are not FDA approved. They are well-meaning, but we're not sure to what extent they will actually be employed. So at this point, we would not make a recommendation in that area.
Okay, Leslie Ann has a question for you or a comment. Go ahead, Leslie Ann.
Thanks. Jill, just to let you know, at Woods Hole, I run an additive manufacturing and rapid prototyping facility, and we have 3D printers that are state of the art, well beyond what you guys have in your schools, very large devices, can print faster. The institution's been working with Cape Cod Healthcare to determine what our shops can produce. And we have, through scientifically rigorous and mechanical shop evaluation, determined that we cannot produce masks in any level of volume or any level of need for the community. So I completely concur with your assessment on what the schools could be doing for the healthcare community. That being said, I think that the student project is an interesting idea, but we can't even do it with our professional grade machines in any quickness or any quality. So the schools really shouldn't be doing this either.
That's really nice to hear from the standpoint that it certainly pains us when we are unable to meet the needs of the community. We would love to be able to try to find a way to meet community needs, but we're just, so it's comforting to hear that our assessment of the situation is in line with your experience as well.
In addition, as you know, the ink for these machines is crazy expensive. So if we were to do that, it would have, if any volume, it would have significant budgetary impacts that I'm not sure we're ready for. And even our institution is trying to figure out how to do that if we could.
Thank you. And then finally, we do know that the state has applied for MCAS waivers, and I think Jason is going to speak more to this later on, but we have not received any updated guidance from the commissioner. We have been working on a remote education plan with our leaders, our staff. We even had input from our special education attorney. That was shared with staff today. It was sent out to all school committee members today. And we ask that you not share this publicly, as it has not been shared with the public and should come from our school. And it also would give our staff, we're really looking at a quick turnaround here. We received guidance. Guidance went out to families on March 30th from the commissioner. And we put into place a a new remote education learning plan that teachers are just looking at for the first, many teachers are looking at for the first time today. So we do not want to have them inundated with questions about this. We want the announcement to come from the schools. But we also wanted you to be aware of the content of that remote education plan. And the other thing that is coming up, which we haven't received guidance on, is the question of April vacation. And whether to continue learning throughout April vacation, and if we continue throughout April vacation, what that would mean in terms of contractual obligations and things of that nature. So, yeah.
Jill, I was in a conversation earlier today with some leadership up at the state level in DESE. It's local control over April vacation and when we want to end the school year. And it would be my recommendation to the committee that we stick to the calendar we have. And then times are stressful enough as they are. A lot of people need to take a breather at some point. And as we get this remote learning going, I think having a week off for teachers to regroup and for families to regroup and reassess in case we end up having closures longer than the May 4th would probably be a pretty good idea. So I would not be in favor of us skipping April vacation or extending our school year beyond the snow days that we had already talked about in previous meetings.
I don't know if there's any other discussion on that. Certainly it helps us in terms of not having to revisit contractual obligations by changing a calendar at this point.
I think what Jason said makes absolute sense. I would support his position on that.
Anyone else? Okay.
So we're happy to try to answer any questions for you that we may have answers for. And just, sorry, I have people living in my house. I apologize. I don't know if you have questions for us.
I've got one. I know Laura does. And don't feel bad. I keep putting my phone on my video on mute because my very large dog is sitting next to me growling at me. So I didn't want you guys to have to hear that. Do we know anything about the bus contract? Are we going to have to pay the full year bus contract?
So what districts have been encouraged to do is to work with their bus companies to work out some sort of an agreement. The idea being that it allows companies to pay their workers during the closure. And so that should we be able to return to school, we would have drivers and buses once again available to us. But it's also in keeping with the general expectations that we continue to try to pay employees throughout the closure. What further complicates it is that we waited for, and Christine can probably better explain this than I can, we waited for communication and expectations for a while before we wanted to address this, because it truly is uncharted, and it would need to be, what we're looking at is whether or not we negotiate some sort of partial payment during this closure, and we would need an addendum if in fact we decided to go that route to our contract with the bus company.
Can I ask one more follow-up question? Do we have any idea what Fred's seeing other districts do? Does Fred have any insight?
So there are some companies that have been paying. There's some districts that have been paying since the closure. There are some districts that are negotiating for about something around a 50%. And there are a list of at least 10 schools, I think about 10 schools in the Lighthouse area that have currently started paying their bus company based upon these modified agreements. So what's interesting about our bus contract is that it's not by day, it's for the school year. And so there's nothing that prevents us from paying them, but I don't know if Christine wants to add anything.
Yeah, I was
And
going to
I'd
add
like to
that
speak to- Go ahead, Christine.
you're correct about our contract, that it calls for them to transport our students 180 days, and they believe that they're ready and willing to do that, but they can't. There are limitations right now. But originally, what DESE was trying to do is they were looking at the transportation companies as an extension of us, as they were looking at collaboratives as an extension of us. And to have that continuity of transportation, we come back, we may, there is a dollar value involved with making that happen. And they originally had a plan that they were trying to match up all the similar companies within the state. So we happen to have 40 people in the state that use First Student. So could we all negotiate with First Student to come up with one agreement for the 40 of us? But everybody's contract is different, so that may end up being a little more challenging than at first look. But the list was actually generated the other day, and we are starting to look at what the options are for us. And I know that First Student is available to negotiate.
So I think another aspect of this is the government is looking at us as a stopgap for the unemployment rate. And that's why they're asking us to keep contracts continuing, even though we're out of school. We've had discussions. Jill actually has a meeting with the chairs of all of the committees set up, which I think is a great idea, just to touch base so we all have similar information going back and forth. But I would be unwilling to sign a contract giving money to First Student if they were going to lay off any of their people. It seems to me that would be sort of a double dipping sort of situation where we would be paying for them to stay afloat, but they're pushing their people onto the unemployment regs. I did see some language that Jill sent over to me today that they said that they would absolutely not lay off people if we entered into this agreement with them. I'd want to see that in a contract before I'd be comfortable, but that's kind of where we are. Leslie Ann?
I don't know if Gordon is, I don't think he's on the line tonight, but I'm sure he may have something to add to this. But I completely agree with you that we want to keep as many people employed as possible. And if it's within our current budget and we were already planning for it, I think that's totally understandable to do, as long as we have the backstop that you just suggested through them not laying their own staff off. That being said, our budgets, or at least our town contributions, are based on our expected revenues. And our expected revenues are going to not be anywhere near as high as we thought they were. And I'm concerned that even though we may not be laying off bus company people, and I'm very in tune to that fact, we may end up putting this back on the taxpayer in our own towns eventually to pay our deficit. So I'm a bit torn.
I can speak to that for you. And Gordon actually asked me to do this research because he knew the meeting I was going to be in this morning. So our budget for this year is pretty secure. The State House believes that it will have within its capacity the ability to pay the towns for the remainder of this fiscal year, which ends on June 30th. They are projecting at this point a fiscal deficit of $300 to $700 million by June 30 because of the current situation we're in. Where they're really concerned is with their FY21 budget. Their current projection is $2 billion loss in revenues year over year. So I was told today that the governor's budget, House 1, that we discussed at the end of January, that we based some of our numbers and our assessments on, is being thrown out. And they're starting over from scratch on Tuesday at the State House. They're having their audit team come back, their economic team come back, and they're going to start from scratch with the state budget for next year. So we have within our budget the ability to pay this bus contract for this year, but there's a significant chance that all of us are going to have to come back to the table and re-examine our own budget and our own situation for the next school year.
Jason, can I just respond to part of what you said in your response about the for a student not laying off their drivers.
Yes,
The
Christine.
things that was suggested from DESE is that as we come up with these alternate agreements, that we include a clause where two things, that they would be maintaining their drivers, and that number two, they would not be applying for stimulus funds. Because if they were doing that, then they could be triple dipping if all those things happened.
True. Does anybody want some good news? So the USDA did extend reimbursement for free and reduced lunch to all school districts, and that would include school districts that have less than 50% of students on free and reduced lunch, which is all of our districts. So we'll be able to approach that. I know there's also a group right now advocating for Medicaid funds. Some of the funds for some of our special ed students may be paid with federal dollars that come out of Medicaid reimbursement. Currently, since schools aren't in session, those funds aren't being sent to the towns and the schools who have those students. So we are actively pursuing those funds as well. We're working with MAVA, which is the vocational association in the state. Right now, we have some concerns about vocational students not having all of their hours to meet certification. And we're working with the Division of Professional Licensure to make sure that we have some guidelines to help out students who might need additional hours towards certifications for their vocational occupations. And as Jill alluded to, the legislature right now is crafting a special law that would give the Commissioner of Education the authority to delay, modify, or eliminate MCAS from this school year. He's being a little bit coy right now with what his intent is. I think he's hoping that we will go back to school on May 4th, and I believe Secretary Pizer, who was one of the original crafters of the MCAS in Massachusetts, telling him right now not to cancel MCAS until he has a little bit more data. It is quite clear, and I sent the message today that we had called for no MCAS, and we're not intending on making any of our students, especially our seniors, go through that process this year, and that we had waived the graduation requirements at the state level. I had a lot of eyebrows go through the roof, but I was supported heavily by MASC's Executive Director, Glenn Kuchar, that we had the local control over that, considering the state of emergency that we find ourselves in. So we'll keep pushing for the elimination of MCAS for this year. We understand it's an important metric for the state and for DESE to have, but under the current circumstances, there's no way this could be a fair way of assessing our students or our schools. And we know that data will be used regardless of what they tell us. So that's my update. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add to the meeting tonight?
I just wanted to make one comment. I haven't looked at the remote learning plan yet, but I just wanted to acknowledge the huge amount of work that I'm sure you all have been working on, all the folks in school. You know, having been part of a team over the last week or so, tasked with reinventing education as we know it in less than a week, it is a huge task and so many things that people just don't even think about. So, you know, kudos to, you know, Ryan and Jill and Jim and Michaela for all the work that I'm sure has gone into, you know, over the last week, thinking about what is this going to look like, and all the pieces you've had to put together, because it's just an unbelievable task. So, you know, thank you. And I hope that, you know, all of us on the committee can support the work that's being done and really help people to understand that everybody's doing their best on this. And it's not going to be perfect, but we're trying, everybody's trying really hard to make it work. So, so thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone, for your support. And we also like to thank our staff, too, because we had a number of staff members participate in its creation and construction.
That was well said, Laura. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add? Go ahead, Mike.
So, so will we start seeing work being sent to the students at the high school level this week here?
That's the intent. The intent is for us, we have a question and answer session for staff tomorrow. They received their draft late this afternoon. And so we anticipate a number of questions tomorrow, and we would like to begin this plan early next week. That's ambitious. We recognize that, but at the same time, we also know that we want to continue our learning efforts and to extend beyond what we're currently doing in terms of expectations with the guidance from the state that we now have.
So are we being consistent with the message at both levels, at the middle school and the high school?
It's one plan for all schools.
Okay, so I have a student in the middle school and a student in the high school. The student in the middle school has received quite a bit, and my student at the high school has received hardly anything.
Does anyone want to answer that? I can answer it if you want me to.
So, I mean, if I would chime in just to say it from a parent's perspective, if you're concerned, to reach out first to the students' teachers and just ask them, you know, is there anything that we're missing on our end? Most of our teachers have been really good. They're using Google Classroom. So parents may not be getting the alert if they're not signed into it, but students should be getting those updates for enrichment opportunities.
But I have been getting the alerts from my student in the middle school, but not at the high school.
So is that something that is a setting, or is that because they're going directly to students, Michaela?
So my understanding is it may just be going directly to students if they haven't added parents into that classroom. So I would, again, and this is for any parent, you know, I would start by reaching out to the teachers, and then if there are concerns, you know, shoot me an email and we can look into it for you.
Yeah, I was just, my concern was when we met the last time here, when we had the language in that memorandum there that I don't have it in front of me, but I believe Leslie Ann had brought it up. Or maybe it was Laura. It's just, to me, it doesn't feel consistent. That's all.
So Mike, if, I'm happy to add a little bit to that. So when Jill talked about the guidance from DESE, that hasn't been rolled out to, so initially when we anticipated this closure, the MOA talks about enrichment and communication with families. And this plan, as it gets rolled out to staff, will be the biggest clarification for staff, for families, and for kids about what the expectations are. We hope to see, and teachers did a really good job turning on a dime. There will be.
We lost you, Ryan. You froze.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to make sure, Ryan, we lost you for a second in the middle of your sentence and your explanation of how this is changing from the enhanced, model to the direct instruction model. So if you want to go back and just cover what you just said, we missed that.
Sure. Sorry about that. Lots of work from home. Just that with the guidance that there's a lot more clarification now on what's expected of students, staff, how families can support it. There's guiding principles in there that acknowledge the situation happening and that we prioritize the health and well-being of students and staff and families. So I think when you have a chance to review it and we review it with staff, it'll feel more consistent for everybody as we launch it next week.
Yeah, and we have to remember too, last week when we met, that I had access to a draft of that memo from the commissioner before it was publicized. So we had a little bit of a peek behind the curtain of how these changes were being rolled out. So it is legitimately a change that a lot of teachers are just encountering now, depending on how different administrators are working with those teams. So what I would say is, to echo what Laura said earlier, is just gather that information in public, try and be as positive as possible, direct people to the proper chain of going to the teachers first, and maybe contacting the building principals, and then we could go up to Ryan and Jill if necessary. I think it's going to be pretty important that as we set expectations with our teachers, that we have a max and a minimum setting. We know we have some superstar teachers out there, and we don't want to hinder their creative spirit, but we want to make sure that they're at least communicating what they're doing to their grade level colleagues and their subject to like colleagues, because we don't want this to be a situation where one person inadvertently makes others look bad either. So that's just something we should be conscious of, as well as setting that minimum expectation of what we would like every teacher in the district to be doing on a weekly basis. Leslie Ann, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so I did get a chance to look at the guidance that you all sent out, the expectation document, briefly before we started, and I think it's very comprehensive and very well thought through. And it does say in there that essentially if the teacher hasn't heard from a student, then the teacher will be reaching out to the student directly. And if the teacher doesn't hear from the student, the teacher will be reaching out to the families. So there is a bit of a quality control on making sure the kids are at least paying attention, which I really liked about that. I guess to add on to Mike's comment, which I guess went off mine last week, does this mean process-wise now that MOU gets revised?
So we are starting to get requests to update the memorandums of agreement, but we did involve union leadership in the creation of this document. So they are just looking to add language, I anticipate, because I've already been presented with one, and that language is really just more in line with what the current remote learning plan is, so that there's no question about it. Then they're looking to be more aligned with the remote learning plan than the original memorandum of agreement had been crafted.
Just as a piece of information from another town, as I think I'd mentioned to you guys before, you guys probably do too, but I know the chair of the Duxbury school committee from just my Pilates class I'm in, and she said that actually some of their teachers are actually giving new material. And I said, well, how are they doing that? Doesn't that go against DESE guidance? And also, don't you think that there's going to be some kind of legal argument against that? And she said, yeah, possibly. So we're looking into it.
So DESE did give the some discretionary language, but they were also very careful to recommend that we deepen and apply learning, because we have to remember that not all students will have the equitable access that we are challenged with in this current situation. And we want to make sure that we are meeting our civil rights and special education and 504 and English language learner expectations as well. And so we've tried to build in language to provide as much support and communication among families so that we can make sure that there is that kind of equity of access to the best of our ability. But even our special education attorney had kind of steered us away from certain language that we would be less likely to be able to support.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? All right, we're going to be back together in a week. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your time.
Have a
Thank
good night.
you.
Bye.